And this is our second Sunday in this series, and I'm still trying to figure out when the music ends. I apologize. I should know better. It's not the fault of the technical team. It's the problem of the bonehead pastor who can't seem to figure out the timing. Before we move into the second part of this series, let me remind you of what I introduced you last week and want you to continue to uncover and find out about rest in peace medical debt. During the month of March, from March 1 to April 1, as we ramp up to Easter, we are asking you to give generously to help us retire medical debt in Cobb County of about $7 million that is accumulated by our hospital authorities here by people who fall in the federal poverty rate. What Rest in Peace Medical Debt does, and I hope you've taken some time to check out what I told you to last week, go to their website and to ours. Rest in Peace Medical Debt goes to communities like ours and works with hospital authorities, and they buy medical debt pennies on the dollar. So a gift of $100 can, in fact, pay $1 can wipe out $100 of debt. And I think you have some numbers that I shared last week, and well, let's go back. I think you had another one there that I saw. There we go. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. $15,000 of a contribution from Eastside to RIP Medical will wipe out $1.5 million in debt, all the way up to those lines and standards leading up to a $70,000 fundraising drive by our church here could erase all $7 million of medical debt in Cobb County. That is part of the urban poor, or those that are the federal poverty rate that owns this. What happens is that collection agencies will go to hospitals and buy that debt pennies on the dollar. Then the collection agencies go and just make life a living hell for those folks to pay it back. This way, they will be notified that Eastside Baptist Church, each one will be notified, Eastside Baptist Church of Marietta, Georgia, Lower Roswell Road has paid the debt. Let's look at just some of the statistical realities of medical debt in America. Every day, 79 million Americans choose between paying their medical bills and basic needs like food and shelter. 66% of all U.S. bankruptcies are tied to medical debt issues. 25% of all U.S. credit card debt is medical in its charges. 650,000 families have had their medical debt forgiven through donations through our partner, Rest in Peace Debt Organization. And there have been so far 152 campaigns by local churches, synagogues, and communities. And you can go online and check this out. Now, we have our Follow Eastside website that we'd like to encourage you to go to. If you go to Follow Eastside, you just there on that front page, you'll see RIP Medical. Click there and you'll see a video by me, and you'll see a thermometer with $15,000 as the goal. And that's our initial goal. If we can raise $15,000 as a church, we can erase in Cobb County $1.5 million of medical debt of our citizens who live at the federal poverty level. And on it goes, from $30,000 to $3 million, $70,000 can erase all of that medical debt at the present time of $7 million. I really want to encourage you to do this. And if you're not comfortable giving online, you want to send something here, let us know, call us, and we'll work with you. But you can go with the Rest in Peace Medical. We have a special website that's set up just for Eastside, and it can make a huge difference. In a world where there's a lot of agony and stress already going on, add medical debt to that. This can be a huge, huge difference if Eastside will step up. We want to leave that with you, let you get comfortable with it. But I hope this week, thank you for those that have already given. I hope this week that more of you will give. This will be our primary Easter drive for a financial offering to bless our Cobb County community in 2020 as we approach the Resurrection Sunday. I'd like to encourage you to turn with me to Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26, or take whatever copy of God's Word you have. We are in the second full week of what the culture calls the Lenten season, and we're the second Sunday of a new series we're entitling 40 Days of Decrease. And in these 40 days before Easter, we are looking for things that we can in our lives give up. The title of 40 Days of Decrease comes from this book that I shared with you last week by Alicia Britt Cholet. And in her book, which is really good, I encourage you to get it this Lent season, she basically talks about the concept of fasting beyond food, fasting beyond a meal, fasting beyond just the issues related to hunger and all of that we typically think of a fast related to. She asks questions in the book, things like this. What if your family fasted from denial? What if your friends fasted from comparison? What if your generation fasted escapism? What if your church fasted spectatorship? Great questions. And the big idea of this book and the big idea of the series is basically this. What would happen if we thinned out our lives in order to thicken our communion with God? What if we thinned out our lives in order to thicken up our relationship with God? So during these 40 days before Easter, we're looking at some areas where you and we can experience decrease. Last week when we began the series, we looked at two areas where we should look at decreasing. I think we could all agree that we should take a fast from apathy, where we go, who cares, what, me worry, Take a fast from that kind of attitude. And as well, take a fast from appearances. The kind of appearances where we're trying to impress people, the kind of appearances that can create images of hypocrisy, the kind of thing in which we are far from just being real. That was the focus last week. Today we want to look at two more. In the next few minutes, we want to look first at comparison. Comparison. Years ago, the great comedic actor, a real genuine article in show business when it came to silent films, movies, scripts, and comedy was Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin died in the late 70s, and a few years before his death, Charlie Chaplin decided to enter himself in a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest. And he thought this was in France, and where he was living, and he thought it was going to be a lot of fun and probably thought he would be a shoo-in for the prize. And that everyone would have a great laugh, and that was kind of Charlie Chaplin's ironic humor. But the fact of the matter is, in the Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest, Charlie Chaplin came in third. And he was stunned. He couldn't believe it. Charlie Chaplin came in third when compared to other Charlie Chaplin impersonators. It's kind of funny to me. Now, when we talk about comparison, and I do want to do for teaching purposes today, I think about comparisons and how destructive they can be. But I also want to be honest and say that comparisons can be a great motivators even to societal change. For instance, when Rosa Parks in the early 1950s got aboard a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, she began to make a comparison as to the seats that she was allowed to sit in and compared them to the seats in which the white patrons were allowed to sit in. And over a period of time, this comparison began to bother her to a point that she took her stand, if you will. She drew her line in the sand, and she wanted that issue to change. That appropriate comparison fueled change that was very, very right. And oftentimes, comparisons of issues of inequality or injustice highlights the need for change. But I want to talk not about that kind of productive or positive comparison. I'd like to talk about a comparison that for us in our daily walk in this community, or in our offices, or in the classroom, that kind of comparison can become very, very destructive. Now, in the Disney Snow White animated motion picture, there is the Wicked Witch. And she looks and she says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" And that is a question in which the witch looks in the mirror and wants a statement related to comparison. But here's what sin does with that kind of statement or that kind of question. What sin does, it provides a cracked mirror. What sin does, it provides a cracked perspective. It provides an unrealistic view of this compared to that. And if you leave comparison alone in your work, in your societal life, if you let it just do what it does in the context of cracked sin, there are all kinds of conflicts and all kinds of jealousies that will arise with this word, 3 syllables, called comparison. Now, I'd like to teach something this morning that I hope will be refreshing and helpful to you as we look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane in Matthew chapter 26. Look at 10 verses, beginning at verse 36. We'll finish around verse 46. In verse 36 of Matthew 26, Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. We know this is a garden, an olive garden, a field, a garden of Gethsemane. And he says to them, his disciples, "Sit here while I go there and pray." Then in verse 37, he took Peter and 2 sons of Zebedee, that would be James and John. He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began, Jesus did, to be sorrowful and troubled. For Jesus is going to be to be arrested, and he's going to be tried, he's going to be convicted, and he's going to be crucified. Now just a matter of hours from this moment. In verse 38, then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." He says to these 3 men, "Stay here and keep watch for a while." And going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground. And Jesus prayed, "My Father, if this is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples, and he found them sleeping. Jesus says, Could you not, as men, keep watch with me for just an hour? Directed that to Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." And he went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, is it not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it? May your will be done." And he came back, and he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. And so he left them and went away, and once more he prayed the 3rd time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples, this would be a 3rd time, and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near, and the Son of Man," that's Jesus, "is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go, because here comes my betrayer." That would be Judas. Now, in this particular 10-11 verse section, we are watching Jesus arrive at the gate of the Garden of Gethsemane with 11 of his disciples. Judas is away doing his work of betrayal to identify Jesus and to get the 30 pieces of silver, and all of that unfolds with Judas is happening while these 11 men and Jesus are at the garden gate. After a few moments of being at that garden gate, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John deeper into the garden. Peter, James, and John are known, if you are a New Testament student, as the inner circle of Jesus. And what he does when he takes them away is he takes them into a presence, into an experience, into an environment in which the other 8 at the gate are not exposed to. This would be the 3rd time that Jesus is with his inner circle. The first time he is with his inner circle is at the Mount of Transfiguration. This is where the body of Jesus is transfigured, and his appearance is compared to that of being white as snow. It either happened at Mount Tabor or Mount Hermon. I think Mount Hermon, which is on the Lebanese border, and it's a snow-covered mountain on the northern Israel, southern Lebanon border, snow-covered 365 days a year. And when Jesus was transfigured, the people who saw it were Peter, James, and John. There was a second time that the inner circle was with Jesus when the other disciples were not. Jesus goes to a man's house named Jairus, and Jairus has a daughter who has died. And in that room, these three men witnessed Jesus raising that little girl from the dead. What a moment it must have been. Now, for the third time, they find themselves with Jesus being pulled away from the other 8 or 9 and finds themselves in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus asks them to pray, and he goes away further to pray by himself to battle in that final moment, in that divine humanity of his, as to what God's will would be for his life and what would give God greater glory. And on 3 occasions, Jesus returns back to find them, and he sees that they are asleep. Now, this is where we tend, as 21st century Christians, to want to beat up on the disciples. What's wrong with you guys? Can't you stay awake? Jesus has asked you to stay awake and pray. But I think it is sympathetic that we can be toward the disciples, because they, in their humanity, were having to deal with the fact that Jesus had promised a day was coming that he would die. And they had to deal with that reality, and that is a deeply stressful and sorrowful and overwhelming moment. Now, some people, when they get that kind of stress, can't sleep. And maybe you're like that. But there are other people, when they get that kind of feeling, is they cope by going to sleep. And I know some folks like that. And I think these disciples were so overwhelmed, Peter, James, and John. They had been with him on the mountain. They had been with him in that house. And now they're with him, and he is going away from them even further to be alone, and Jesus is going to die. What a moment it was. Jesus wants them to watch and pray. But every time he comes back, he finds them exhausted and asleep. Now, I've just done this, like most Bible students do, or teachers do. We spend a lot of time talking about the 3, Peter, James, and John. But have you ever pondered what it was like for the other 8 men who were left behind at the gate? Who were left behind when Jesus took the other 3 to the mountain? Or left behind when Jesus took the other 3 into the house to see the little girl be healed, to rise from the dead. You see, the 8 had seen this scenario 3 times now. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John away, and as a result, they would come back in the know. They would come back knowing what happened. They saw Jesus transfigured. They saw Jesus heal in the intimacy of that moment. And they saw Jesus interceding related to the issues of life and his soon death. Now, I say that because, again, if you are a Bible student of the Gospels, you know that the disciples struggled with comparisons. There were times when they would say, Jesus, who will be on your right or who will be on your left? Which of your disciples will have more responsibility in your kingdom? Which of your disciples will have more credit or more fame or recognition or more authority in your kingdom? They struggle with comparisons. Have you ever been like that? Have you been that way at work? Ever felt that way? When others seem to be closer to the boss than you're closer to the boss? Or in the classroom, when others seem to be closer to the teacher than you are with the teacher? On the field of play, other players are closer to the coach than you are to the coach. Or in a church, other people are closer to the pastor than other people are at the church. And here's a situation where other people are selected to be closer to Jesus than the other disciples. That's comparison. And when you begin to perceive your worth and value by your perception of another person's reality, therein lies a tremendous problem. Before I came here 4 years ago, I had an opportunity to oversee some larger ministries from the standpoint of media and international standpoint being larger. And the organization I worked for about 13 years was its CEO was a leadership training organization. And we had a high profile chairman and founder. And I remember that when we would go into various places around the world to train leaders, and we train millions of them, Christian leaders, we would usually go into a part of the world and launch by continent. So we would launch into Europe and Russia. We would have a launch for about 10 days where we would go into Latin America, or we would go into Asia, or we go into Africa. And these kind of launches were quite good, got great exposure and mobilized Christian leaders and churches and business leaders, and we were able to provide our systematic training afterwards. And I remember we were getting ready to go into Latin America to launch, and we had with us on that tour several people for that launch. And by God's grace and the kindness of the Lord, the president of a Central American country had found out that our team was coming, that our founder would be there, and wanted to have an audience with our founder, and our founder could have an audience with the president. And we were notified in advance that there would be 4 people who would be allowed to go into the presidential office and have a visit with the president of this country. And so it was a big deal. So we sat down, the founder and I did, said, who should go? And he was very gracious. He said, John, I think you should go. You should be there. You're the CEO. You run the organization. You're practically the reason we're here with the logistics, et cetera, and the team. I'd like for you to go. And then he said, I think we ought to take, and he named 2 pastors who I agreed were outstanding. They highly influential guys. I could mention their names here and you would know them. They were with us on this tour and they would go as well. And I said, that's great. I agree. And so we went on the tour. We began in one country and we would be there for a day and a half. We go to another and we have events. And it was just like a political campaign moving from one place to another. It was a wonderful trip. We came to that time at that country to meet with that president in Central America. And we all got dressed up in our suits and we went and we got to the presidential palace. We were let through. We were escorted to the president's office. And the president would see us at a certain time. And then this assistant came out and saw 4 of us and said, I'm sorry, the president will only meet with 3 of you. And so I looked at the founder and the founder looked at me. And we knew what had to happen. And we knew that those 2 guests who were very influential leaders, and of course, the founder of the organization should go and I should stay outside that presidential office. I didn't get to go to the meeting. I had been through all those things, through all those years, and they went in the meeting and I stayed outside. And that was a moment for me. If you're competitive, you got some ego. If you worked hard, and humanly speaking, you think you're deserving of something, that'll sting a little bit. The older I get, the more I realize that instead of resenting people who may have an opportunity I don't, or that are chosen before I would ever be chosen, or selected by those who would ever be chosen, I think it's far better for me to spend time praying for them as opposed to comparing myself to them. Now, unless you think this is an occupational hazard for your pastor or a flaw in me, how many of you, I wonder, have been upset when other people in your office were chosen to take that business trip and you weren't? Or somebody else got the promotion and you didn't? Or someone else had the favor of the president of the company or the director or the district manager of sales and you didn't? See, here's my point. If we're not careful, we can allow at every level of life, secular or sacred, become a trap for us when it comes to this issue of comparison. Perhaps we should stop comparing and start praying for those that are closer in. Throughout my life, God's been very faithful. Really, since about 1993, I have an opportunity in my life to meet, I would say, every major Christian leader personality, just about everyone in the United States, Canada, some from around the world. And when I'm with them and I enjoy them and I learn from them and I'm encouraged by them, but they've been in meetings I will never be in. They will go places I will never go. They will influence people I will never influence. And I'm honored to meet them, and nor do I ever think that I have the capacity to do what they do. But they're closer in. I can tell you over the last 18 months, I met with 3 high-profile Christian leaders. As I get older now and begin to put it in perspective, I met with 3 high-profile Christian leaders, and I know them and love them well, and they were gracious to me. But when I looked at their faces and I understand the demands on their time and the stress on their shoulders and the responsibility they carry, I can name all 3 of these people. You know them. I come back home and I say, Sharon, say, how'd it go? And I just say, I thank God I'm not them. Comparison. Comparison when you get jealous. One of my favorite authors is a pastor. He's been around a long time. He's blessed me through the years. He wrote this. He said, I have few characteristics that are true of me, and one of those traits is I don't have 1 ounce of envy inside me. That's not me, but that's him. He says, I have many weaknesses, but thankfully this isn't one of them. Not even when I was much younger, many years ago, pastoring a small town in New England. We didn't experience numerical growth. One 4th of July weekend came on a Sunday. We had about 7 in our congregation, and 3 of them were my family. I refused to let it bother me that another church near ours was growing steadily. They had about 200 on that same Sunday. But I never let it trouble me. We weren't in competition. Refuse to think competitively, he says. God has gifted everyone uniquely and distinctly, and believe that. He has gifted many in various ways, and that includes you. Let it be. Don't sweat it. Put competition to rest. We can choose not to compare ourselves with others and not surround ourselves with those who have a competitive spirit. We're all in this together. So if one is in need, we all pitch in. And if one rejoices, we all rejoice. Envy is a thief, and it will steal your joy. Here's what I've learned about my life, and I would pass it on to you. That if you're always comparing yourself to others, you'll never know who you are. Never will. And I just want you to put that when you're looking at somebody else's house, somebody else's school, somebody else's education, somebody else's ride, transportation, their car, club membership, associations. If you just live your life like that, oh my. You know, what was it, Waylon Jennings? We've been so busy keeping up with the Joneses, 4-car garages, and we're still building on. Maybe it's time, sing it with me, maybe it's time we get back to the basics of life. Comparison. It'll kill. It'll absolutely kill you. Let me give you one more as the room grows increasingly silent. Here we go. Go over to Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. Take a fast from comparison this Easter season. Let me give you one verse. Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. Paul says, I am not saying this because I am need, for I have learned, then he says this, I have learned to be content in whatever the circumstances. He goes on and he says there, I've learned what it is to be in need, I've learned what it is to be in plenty, but I have learned a secret that I can be content in and in every situation. That is very, very powerful. If you're around me for very long and we talk about leadership or we talk about life, marriage, my job here, you'll hear me use a phrase that really is rooted in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11, that there is a difference between being content in and content with. Big difference. Let me give you some examples. For instance, I am content in my marriage. And I'm really hoping, Sharon, that you're content too, all right? I'm content in my marriage. We've been married since June 18th, 1983. And I have been content in my marriage all that time. I want to be content in my marriage. But what I don't ever want to be is content with my marriage. Because you see, if I get content with my marriage, my eyes will go where they should not go. My thoughts will go where they should not go. My mind will think things I should never have come across my mind. I am content in my marriage, but through the years, we've had to not be content where it is or with it because we've got things that we need to do, develop and grow. Let me give you another example. I am content in my calling here. I am content in my calling. A little over 4 years ago, y'all called me to come, and I believed it was the will of God, and I am content in my calling here. But if you spend 15 minutes with me and talk about Eastside, you're going to very quickly find that I'm not content with my calling here. From the standpoint that there are things that need to be done, there are ministries that need to be developed, there are some things that need to be cut. There are things that need to be added. There's always work that needs to be done. I'm very content in my calling here, and I come to work here every morning content and grateful to be your pastor. I'm grateful for the team I have and the people who surround me and give me the honor of working with them. I am very content, but I will never be content with Eastside. Never. Because there's always something that can be improved, always something that can be a value add. There's always some new way to serve the Lord in a changing, complex, secular society. I'll tell you where some marriages and churches have problems is when a partner or a leader in one of those institutions gets content with what they have. And churches go down. You get content with it. Giving goes down, but you make adjustments and then you don't see anyone coming to the Lord, you don't see any baptism, you don't see any growth, and everybody just kind of gets lulled into a sleep because somewhere there was a leader who got content with the church. And I just don't want to be that guy. Could be, but I don't want to be that guy. Now here's what Paul says here, and this is the theology of this. Paul has said in Philippians 4:11 that I have learned to be content, satisfied. That word satisfied or content, the prefix of that word in Greek is the word auto, A-U-T-O, that we would say transliterated, meaning self. I have learned to be self-satisfied. I have learned to be self-content in whatever state or situation I am in. Now let me finish this message and tie it back to the initial point of comparison. I want you to think about Judas for a moment. Judas, out of the millions of people Jesus could have selected to be one of his 12, Judas was one of the disciples of Jesus Christ, one of the 12. But it wasn't enough. Do you hear me? It wasn't enough. And Judas, not even a part of the story, as we saw a few minutes ago, he is out negotiating, gaining blood money. He puts money in his pouch for 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus, but he discovers once he does it, it's not enough. Joseph Heller wrote a great book many years ago around the Korean War, World War II, called Catch-22. He was attending a cocktail party in the Hamptons, a high society party in New York years ago, and a friend of his came up to him and said, "Hey, Heller, you see that guy over there, that handsome guy, well-dressed guy? He's a hedge fund company owner. That guy over there, he makes more money in a year than you will make with all the books you ever sell. How do you feel about that?" He said, "Well, this is what I know. I have something that he doesn't have. I have something that that man will never know." And his friend said, "What is that?" And Heller said, "Enough." Just came through Christmas, and some of you watched Love Actually for the 47th time. And you know where I'm going in Love Actually, that there are these different characters and plays and people interacting with each other. And there is two men early in the movie who are friends, we find out, and his friend gets married, and he ends up marrying a woman that the other friend was in love with but could never say anything about it because his friend was in love with her and had asked her to marry him, and she did, and he was at peace with it. But through an interesting and funny and movie kind of way, she realizes that this other guy really cared for her. And so around Christmas time, he knocks on her door. She comes to the door, and through another, again, just kind of script in the movie, he, with these cue cards with music playing in the background, something like Silent Night of all things, he tells her in the most appropriate way he can that he cares for her, both knowing, though, that he can never have her because she's now married to his friend. And the friend is oblivious to this. The husband's oblivious to this. And so he goes through this funny routine. It's just repeated, and I think Boris Johnson recreated it when he was running for prime minister in a commercial. And he uses the cue cards, and finally walks away. She comes out and gives him a kiss and a hug, and that's it. And then he utters one word as he walks down the street away from her house. It is the word enough. I wonder what is enough for us. What is enough for us? How much is enough? I just want to say to you folks and me and Sharon and all of us in this room and all of you that are watching us, refuse to allow discontentment to live in your brain. Each time that you are tempted to see your life with something new or somebody new, or to get something else, or you're tempted to get something different because it's different, because you just can't seem to get enough. If you're a Christ follower, would you just stop and thank God for your current reality, for your current state, and simply be content? Last year, there was a survey that was done as to things that Americans are discontent about. This is in 2019. Politicians take these kinds of surveys to heart and try to build a campaign strategy around them. What are Americans discontent about just a year ago? Well, expensive yet inadequate health care, social media's increasing offensive bullying and cyberbullying, the pressure being placed on high school kids today to make great grades, to get in great schools, to be active in student government and sports, not for the sake of the meaning of it, but to get stuff on the resume. Americans are concerned about the opioid epidemic, and they're concerned, your fellow citizens, and maybe you, concerned about young people turning to drugs simply for things like increased focus. You know, whenever I think about our world, and I see how things, even like the coronavirus, can be so upsetting, I think about the importance of what Paul says related to Christians being content in whatever state they're in. I did not know this until a few years ago, but there is actually an annual World Happiness Report. World Happiness Report. And last year in 2019, it ranked the United States as the 19th happiest nation in the world. We are pretty happy, according to the survey. But interestingly enough, it's down. We had a significant decline in happiness since the 1990s. Beloved, what Paul says is possible. It is to be content wherever you may be, whatever state or situation, if you know Jesus. You say, well, I'm not feeling it that way right now. Well, let me encourage you to enhance contentment by practice being kind. Enhance contentment by thinking about how you can positively affect other people's lives. Enhance contentment by not telling the first lie, which can turn to the second lie and the third lie and the fourth. Enhance contentment in your life by volunteering and giving, even to something like RIP Medical. Enhance contentment by following the golden rule. How about over this season before Easter, fasting discontentment? How about fasting from comparison? I hope you take that to heart. I'm trying to. Let's stand together for prayer, shall we? As your heads are bowed and eyes are closed, you know, one of the most beautiful aspects of the gospel is that Jesus goes to the cross and dies for all our sin. And today, if you are here and you have never received forgiveness of what Jesus Christ can do in your life through the forgiveness of sin, I'd like right now to lead you in a prayer for you to receive the forgiveness of sin that only comes from Him, and ask Jesus Christ to be your Lord and Savior. Would you pray this prayer with me right where you are? Pray it silently and mean it. Dear God in heaven, I am a sinner. I am so sorry for my sins. Please forgive me. Come into my life, Lord Jesus, and live within me. Help me give up comparison. Forgive my discontentment. Become my Lord, my Master. I repent. I turn from sin to Jesus. Thank you for saving me from my sin, something I never could do. And if you prayed that prayer with me, here's what I'd love to do. I'd love to meet you. I'm going to be in the back here in just a moment. Daryl's going to close out the service. But I'd love to meet you, and I'll be back there. And while you're back there, you're going to see some round tables, and on those tables are going to be some bundles of some books that's in twine. And I'd love for you to take one of those. In that bundle will be our gift to you. It's just a believer's New Testament. It'll help you get started right in your relationship with Jesus. There's also a book in there by a man named Lee Strobel, who came from unbelief to belief. I hope you'll take it